Shocking news rocks Formula One. Lewis Hamilton terminates his contract with Ferrari on the spot to sign with Red Bull. Don't miss the full story to find out the real reasons behind this dramatic decision. A move that will be remembered as one of the biggest betrayals Ferrari has ever suffered in F1 history. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. It didn't begin with a bang or a headline. It started in whispers. In silent nods exchanged across luxury hotel lobbies where no one dared to lean in. In encrypted messages hidden between firewalls. In conversations that never appeared on any calendar. Beneath the glittering lights of Formula One's Grand Theater, in the very belly of the sport, something monumental was quietly taking shape. And at the heart of it was the most iconic name of the modern era, Lewis Hamilton. A titan. A record breaker. A seven-time world champion whose very name is etched into the bedrock of motorsport history. But in 2025, Hamilton was no longer just fighting on the track. He was battling something deeper, something far more insidious. A feeling that had begun to gnaw at him, race by race, debrief by debrief. The creeping sense that his dream at Ferrari was starting to unravel. This wasn't just a man seeking wins. This was a man chasing immortality. Hamilton hadn't signed with Ferrari for convenience or vanity. He had joined to resurrect a fallen empire, to drape himself in the legacy of Schumacher, to awaken the sleeping dragon in Maranello and lead the Scuderia back to its throne. The mission was mythic in scale. The ambition, absolute. But behind the red curtains of Ferrari, things were never as they seemed. From the moment he arrived, the dynamics were already cemented. Ferrari's golden child, Charles Leclerc, wasn't just a teammate. He was an institution within the team, the hand-picked heir from the Ferrari Driver Academy, the driver whose face adorned the walls of the Gestione Sportiva, the voice whose data dictated design choices. And at first, Hamilton gave them the benefit of the doubt. But the small things began to pile up. Charles receiving the upgraded front wing first. New aero maps appearing on Leclerc's side of the garage before Hamilton's engineers even got the green light. Revised floors. Experimental diffusers. Suspension geometries optimized for oversteer, all aligning with Leclerc's aggressive entry technique. Not just faster parts. Different philosophies. Everything from chassis stiffness to the torque mapping leaned toward Charles's preference for raw turn and aggression, sacrificing the rear-end stability Hamilton relied on for tire preservation and consistency. Hamilton didn't explode. He inquired. Calmly, at first. Technical questions in debriefs. Notes submitted after sim runs. Queries about balance behavior and energy deployment curves. Each time, he was met with polite nods, corporate affirmations, vague promises of reviewing data. But nothing changed. And deep down Hamilton, a man who has fought and won more battles than most drivers dare to dream, knew he was being politically outmaneuvered. Publicly, the narrative stayed composed. Leclerc heaped praise on the team. Hamilton chose his words carefully, but his body language betrayed him. The smile was thinner. The eyes more calculating. The frustration, palpable. Cameras caught him staring at data printouts, lips tight. Engineers avoided eye contact. Journalists speculated. Former drivers whispered on broadcast, "There's tension at Ferrari. You can feel it." But then came Barcelona. A circuit where driver input reigns supreme. Where setup is an art form. Hamilton was finally at one with the SF25. He topped practice. He looked rejuvenated. Then, out of nowhere, the team opted to pull him back to an older rear suspension spec due to unexpected vibrational inconsistencies. The same spec Leclerc had used all weekend. Hamilton qualified 8th. Furious? No. That would be too obvious. He simply walked past the media pen without a word. The silence screamed louder than any quote. That night, alone in his suite, Hamilton made a call. Not to Toto Wolff. Not to Mercedes. But to a Red Bull contact. A name few outside the inner circle even knew. Not because he was certain about leaving, but because for the first time in years, he was listening. Because Red Bull, post-Horner, was evolving. With Christian Horner abruptly removed following bitter infighting and rumors of internal sabotage, the power structure at Red Bull had changed. Helmut Marko's grip loosened. Pierre Watch and a new generation of leadership took hold. The new Red Bull was more pragmatic, more open to risk, and above all, more aware that their future with Max Verstappen wasn't as eternal as it once seemed. The once impossible idea, Lewis Hamilton in Red Bull colors, had now become logical. Sources close to Red Bull claimed Hamilton's experience, telemetry translation skills, and legendary racecraft were exactly what the team needed to maintain superiority as the sport entered yet another evolutionary era in 2026. Max's dominance couldn't last forever. And as Perez's inconsistencies resurfaced, the pressure to secure the team's future rose. Suddenly, the whispers weren't just whispers. They were plans. Hamilton's camp started meeting with lawyers. Ferrari insiders began noticing delays in certain renewal clauses. Red Bull aerodynamicists were spotted dining near Hamilton's trainer in Monaco. And Leclerc? He wasn't smiling anymore. Because he could feel it too, the storm. The unraveling. Internally, Ferrari tried to control the narrative. Leclerc was handed a renewed 5-year deal, dressed up as a long-term commitment to stability. The team insisted both drivers had equal priority. But insiders leaked stories that told a very different tale. Charles was allegedly sitting in on engineering meetings Hamilton wasn't invited to. Development meetings began referencing driver number 1 without clarification. It was no longer a rivalry. It was a Cold War. Meanwhile, Hamilton's performances remained ironclad. He was extracting pace where it didn't exist, managing tires beyond logic, out-qualifying Leclerc in changing conditions. Every time he finished ahead, the cheers from the crowd were louder. The message from the fans was clear: he's not done. In Austria, when Hamilton fought from P11 to P2 on a bold alternate strategy, his radio message post-race said it all. "That's what happens when you let me race." The world heard it. Ferrari heard it. Red Bull definitely heard it. Now, as the second half of the season approaches, everything is hanging by a thread. Hamilton isn't just considering a switch. He's orchestrating it. Every word, every move, every meeting is calculated. This isn't desperation. It's a master strategist setting the board. If he moves to Red Bull, if the man who once called them playground trash talkers wears their colors, it won't just be about wins. It will be about rewriting history. About walking into the kingdom of his greatest rival and building an empire of his own. About proving that even after the politics, the favoritism, the mind games, Lewis Hamilton chooses his own destiny. And the paddock? It's shaking. Every driver feels it. Every team principal dreads it. Every fan can't stop watching. Because when the king returns to battle, when the greatest rises not from comfort but from betrayal, Formula One is never the same again. Behind the polished smiles, the press conferences, and the carefully curated media appearances, something far more complex, and far more personal, was unfolding inside the walls of Ferrari. Charles Leclerc was no longer merely one half of the driver lineup. He had, gradually and unmistakably, been elevated into a position far beyond that. He had become the centerpiece, the symbol, the hand-picked prodigy around whom Ferrari's long-term dreams were now being built. Internally, they called him the foundation. He wasn't just their present, he was the narrative of their future. And that status was being reinforced with every race, every upgrade, and every strategic decision. For Lewis Hamilton, the signs were impossible to ignore. Subtle at first, but then increasingly transparent. What began as small discrepancies soon turned into a clear pattern of preferential treatment. Simulator time, one of the most essential tools in modern Formula One preparation, became a prime example. While Hamilton's requests for extended sessions were often delayed, rescheduled, or labeled as pending, Leclerc's access appeared almost unlimited. Not only was Charles getting exclusive, private simulator runs, but they were also tailored around Ferrari's upcoming development packages. Engineers, data analysts, even the head of aerodynamics would attend his sessions in person. These weren't casual laps. They were strategic meetings disguised as technical rehearsals. Lewis, meanwhile, was often informed that the simulator was unavailable, or that scheduling conflicts prevented access. "It's a tight week," they'd say. "We'll prioritize trackside work this time." Other times, they cited travel limitations, software updates, or team-wide policy changes. But Lewis had been in Formula One too long to be fooled by excuses. He'd seen favoritism before. He could feel it in the shift of energy during briefings. He could hear it in the way his technical suggestions were acknowledged, then quietly dismissed. When Leclerc gave feedback, the atmosphere changed completely. Engineers leaned in. Notes were taken feverishly. Real-time data visualizations were pulled up. Suggestions were met with open discussion, enthusiasm, sometimes even applause. But when Lewis spoke, highlighting car balance issues, inconsistencies in traction maps, tire degradation on long runs, the room often responded with awkward silence, superficial nods, and quick topic changes. It wasn't just a difference in response. It was a difference in respect. And then came the weekend that would change everything, Monaco. If ever there was a circuit that defined driver brilliance, that punished weakness and rewarded raw precision, it was the streets of Monte Carlo. For Lewis, Monaco wasn't just another race. It was hallowed ground. A temple of champions. A place where he had triumphed before, where he knew he could make a statement. Heading into the weekend, he was confident, motivated, hungry. But from the very start, something felt off. On Thursday, he walked into the paddock and noticed the buzz around Leclerc's garage. A different kind of buzz. Engineers were speaking in hushed tones. Additional personnel, some from Ferrari HQ, were seen going in and out. Boxes labeled confidential were moved under covers. A new floor spec, long rumored but never confirmed, was being quietly bolted onto Charles's car. Hamilton asked his race engineer if he'd be receiving the same component. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. No, Lewis, yours will arrive for Barcelona. We're still finalizing production. It was the same answer he'd been given for weeks. Soon. Next race. Just a delay. But now, standing in Monaco, with a brand new upgrade on his teammate's car and nothing on his own, the truth was crystal clear: he wasn't the priority. Qualifying was the final straw. Lewis delivered a lap for the ages. A masterclass. Threading the needle between Armco barriers, shaving millimeters off apexes, pushing a less than optimal car to the absolute edge. When he crossed the line, the garage erupted. They knew how good it was. His race engineer shouted, "That was epic, mate. Absolutely on it." And yet, P5. Seconds later, Leclerc crossed the line. Pole position. By 3/10. In the post-qualifying media scrum, Lewis smiled. He gave the usual lines. "Pleased with my lap, we'll fight tomorrow, let's see how the strategy unfolds." But behind his eyes, the fire was burning. He wasn't angry because Charles was fast. He was angry because the playing field wasn't level. Back in the engineering room, the atmosphere was icy. Everyone had seen the delta between the cars. They knew Lewis had overperformed, that he'd squeezed every drop of performance out of an inferior setup. The data proved it. The telemetry showed it. The meeting began with a standard review. Graphs, sector times, tire degradation curves. No one addressed the elephant in the room, that one car had the latest upgrades, and the other didn't. Eventually, Hamilton leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His voice calm, controlled. But the words carried weight like thunder. "I can't compete with one hand tied behind my back." The sentence cut through the room like a blade. Total silence. One engineer blinked. Another looked down. A third pretended to check something on his laptop. No one dared to answer. No one had the courage or the authority to challenge what had just been said. Because it was true. And everyone in that room knew it. What Lewis felt wasn't just professional frustration. It was betrayal. After all his championships, all his experience, all his contributions to the sport, he was being sidelined. Marginalized. Slowly but surely turned into a second driver by a team that didn't even bother to hide it anymore. He had joined Ferrari with dreams of making history, of bringing glory back to the Scuderia, of winning a championship in red. But now he realized he had walked into a machine that had already made its choice. And it wasn't him. What came next would define the rest of the season, and possibly the rest of his career. Because Lewis Hamilton had never been the type to accept defeat. Not like this. Not silently. It was a sweltering, tension-filled night in Barcelona. The Spanish Grand Prix had concluded hours earlier, but the real drama hadn't yet begun. Lewis Hamilton sat motionless in his dimly lit hotel suite, overlooking the Catalonian skyline, his expression hardened by weeks, no months, of silent frustration. The race had ended with another bitterly familiar result: 7th place. Yet again. And just like in the previous rounds, he had been left scratching his head, questioning the strategy, the pit wall decisions, the timing of the stops, the radio responses, all of it. Once more, Charles Leclerc had been granted priority. Fresher tires. Earlier pit. Cleaner air. A better outcome. And once more, Hamilton had been told to hold position. But this time, something inside him snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. He wasn't just tired. He was done. Done waiting for things to shift in his favor. Done being the experienced veteran they trotted out for PR and post-race interviews, only to undermine him in the garage. He knew the writing was on the wall. Ferrari had already chosen their golden boy, and it wasn't him. He picked up his phone and fired off a short, encrypted message to his manager. The contents were simple, but the implications were monumental. Initiate discreet contact with Red Bull Racing, not with Christian Horner, but with the new power brokers now quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. Helmut Marko, the fiercely independent advisor. Oliver Mintzlaff, the sharp-minded executive bridging corporate and sporting strategy. These weren't people seeking headlines. They were looking for influence, continuity, dominance in a post-Horner landscape. Red Bull was no longer the same team that had once orbited entirely around Max Verstappen. The internal tectonics had shifted dramatically. With Horner's public implosion and the lingering uncertainty around Max's long-term commitment, fueled by whispers of clandestine meetings with Audi, flirtations with Mercedes, and backroom conversations involving Jos Verstappen, there was a power vacuum. And Hamilton, ever the master of timing, saw an opening. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary, nearly 6 weeks of total radio silence to the outside world. Yet behind the scenes, a covert operation unfolded like a well-executed military maneuver. High-level talks, clandestine video calls, NDAs signed by intermediaries, burner phones used for brief exchanges, and private travel arrangements under false pretenses. No one in the paddock suspected a thing. While headlines focused on whether Red Bull could retain their edge in the post-Horner era, the real story was brewing in the shadows. Red Bull had quietly grown weary of Max's growing list of demands, his father's interference, and the increasing unpredictability of the Verstappen camp. Meanwhile, Hamilton was positioning himself not as a fading legend, but as the centerpiece of a revolutionary shift. The negotiations weren't about money. They weren't about ego. They were about power, influence, control. Hamilton made it explicitly clear he would not return to a second driver role. He would not tolerate coded language and shadow favoritism. And under no circumstances would he be anyone's backup singer in the final years of his storied career. He demanded and received complete parity in all technical, strategic, and developmental aspects. He wanted access to the full telemetry data, influence over the development path of the car, the right to provide direct feedback on aerodynamics, simulator inputs, and chassis balance, not just during test sessions, but during real-time car evolution discussions. He even requested direct interaction with Red Bull powertrains to help shape the next generation of hybrid units set to arrive in 2026. He wasn't just joining a team, he was embedding himself into its DNA. And Red Bull? They were all in. With Verstappen growing more volatile behind the scenes, and his entourage applying pressure to shape the team's direction, Mintzlaff and Marko quietly concluded that stability, experience, and global appeal were the way forward. Hamilton represented not just a solution, but a brand revival. A global icon who could headline not just in racing but across fashion, tech, environmental activism, and entertainment. For a company like Red Bull, whose ethos had always been risk-taking and reinvention, Hamilton wasn't a compromise. He was a masterstroke. An internal strategy memo within Red Bull's Salzburg headquarters reportedly labeled the potential deal as the final detonation, blow up the old guard, rebuild with Hamilton. Talks intensified. Hamilton's camp requested specific performance clauses, not just based on points or podiums, but on intra-team equality metrics. They outlined criteria for tire strategy fairness, chassis upgrade timing, and software access. They even requested a rotating driver strategy advisor to ensure neutrality in race day decisions. Red Bull, sensing a chance to flip the narrative and reassert its dominance on and off the track, signed off. They weren't just replacing Horner's vision, they were rewriting it. And in the quiet aftermath of the Hungarian Grand Prix, Under layers of secrecy that even rival teams envied, the groundwork was finalized. A handshake deal. A mutual understanding. A promise of war. Because make no mistake, this was never about peace. It was about vengeance. Redemption. Rebirth. Hamilton wasn't joining Red Bull to finish his career quietly. He wasn't showing up for one last title run. He was arriving to take over. To turn the tables on Ferrari, silence the critics at Mercedes, and challenge Verstappen not just on the track, but in legacy. To become, once again, the gravitational center of Formula One. And Red Bull? They were ready to bet the house on it. The paddock had no idea what was coming. The trajectory of Formula One has been permanently altered. What initially began as a whisper in back corridors has transformed into the most monumental move in recent memory. Behind layers of secrecy, beneath a carefully maintained shroud of silence, a deal was quietly forged, one that would rewrite the competitive landscape of the sport. Red Bull Racing, a team historically engineered around Max Verstappen's instinctive, aggressive style, has undergone a radical philosophical transformation. They've recalibrated their entire technical ethos not for a promising rookie or an up-and-coming star, but for a titan, Lewis Hamilton. Gone are the days when Hamilton had to mold himself around a car that wasn't designed for him. At Ferrari, despite his status as a seven-time world champion, it was Charles Leclerc whose preferences sculpted the team's aerodynamic and mechanical decisions. The Italian outfit's chassis direction, tire management strategy, and even steering geometry were optimized around Leclerc's data. Hamilton, though respected, was never the architect of the Red Machine. He was a tenant in someone else's house. But Red Bull? They handed him the blueprint. Not just a seat. Not just a contract. But access to the very heart of the machine. He wasn't simply offered a drive. He was invited to shape the future. Sources close to the engineering team confirmed that Enrico Balba, one of the leading aerodynamic visionaries at Milton Keynes, was pulled aside and handed a new mandate: redesign the 2026 concept to reflect Hamilton's unique driving DNA. That meant less oversteer bias, more rotational compliance mid-corner, smoother aero balance transitions, and perhaps most critically, a planted rear end under heavy braking. It was a seismic departure from the Verstappen-centric design of previous years. It was a clean slate. Internally, Red Bull referred to the project by an encrypted codename, Initiative LH8. It symbolized not just a driver transfer, but a mission to deliver Hamilton's elusive eighth title. This wasn't about nostalgia. This was about vengeance, redemption, legacy. And then came the moment that changed everything. July 30th, 2025. Zurich. A hotel far from the prying eyes of the paddock. No branded attire. No entourage. No fanfare. In a corner suite, Hamilton met with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. There were no cameras, no digital contracts, no assistants with briefcases. Just printed pages, pens, and an unspoken agreement that what happened in that room would remain hidden until the timing was perfect. That timing was today, August 1st, 2025. At precisely 10 a.m. Central European Time, the Formula One world was rocked to its core. Headlines screamed across every platform imaginable. Lewis Hamilton signs with Red Bull for 2026. The world didn't just react, it imploded. It was a cybernetic eruption of shock, disbelief, outrage, and euphoria. Within minutes, the hashtag Hamilton to Red Bull was the #1 trend globally. Servers crashed under the traffic. Forum threads exploded. WhatsApp groups buzzed like beehives in meltdown. Ferrari fans? Devastated. To them, this was treason, betrayal, an open wound. Hamilton had been their symbol of resurrection, the icon who was meant to bring glory back to Maranello. And now, he was gone. Abandoning the prancing horse for the raging bull. Some Italian newspapers ran front-page stories comparing the move to historical acts of betrayal. Radio shows were flooded with furious callers denouncing him. At the gates of Maranello, supporters gathered not to celebrate, but to mourn. Red Bull loyalists were caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Half celebrated as though they had won the championship already. They saw the union of Hamilton's brilliance with Red Bull's engineering as the beginning of an unstoppable era. The other half? They were alarmed. Would Max leave? Would the team fracture? Could two alphas survive in the same enclosure? And then there were the Hamilton faithful, The believers who had suffered through the heartbreak of Abu Dhabi 2021, endured the draggy Mercedes years, and stood by through the fruitless Ferrari gamble. To them, this wasn't just a transfer. This was a homecoming to dominance. Their champion wasn't retiring. He was rising. Like a phoenix. Armed and dangerous. The silence from key figures was deafening. Mercedes didn't issue a word. No statements. No social media posts. Ferrari put out a robotic, emotionless press release thanking Lewis for his time and professionalism. Max Verstappen? Radio silence. Except for a chillingly ambiguous Instagram story, a stopwatch slowly ticking, followed by a flame emoji. The message was cryptic, but the tension was unmistakable. Inside Red Bull's fortress, however, there was no confusion. Christian Horner knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't just a talent acquisition. This was a strategic masterstroke. While some insiders initially resisted, arguing that the Hamilton-Verstappen dynamic could be combustible, Horner saw the bigger picture, the fusion of the most successful driver of the hybrid era with the most dominant team of the last decade. It was chess, not checkers. A move meant not just to win, but to obliterate the opposition. Hamilton's first simulator sessions are already scheduled. No cameras. No interviews. Just data. Performance. Precision. He's not there for vanity. He's there to shape the RB20X into a title-winning weapon. Engineers who've worked with both drivers have reportedly been briefed to prepare for friction, but also warned, Hamilton is not a guest. He's an architect now. This wasn't a move for the headlines. This was a declaration of war on stagnation, mediocrity, and compromise. 2026 will not be a season. It will be a battlefield. The paddock knows it. The fans feel it. Every rival garage is scrambling to react. And as for Lewis? He broke his silence with a single razor-sharp statement in the official press release. 10 words. No fluff. No ambiguity. The fire never left. I just needed more fuel. The message is loud and clear. The king is back. And he's coming, not to survive. Not to compete. To conquer. The instant the shocking news detonated across the Formula One world, the atmosphere inside Ferrari collapsed into absolute pandemonium. What had once been a sanctuary of ambition, heritage, and prestige was now engulfed by disbelief, outrage, and a profound sense of betrayal. According to several deeply embedded sources in Maranello, team principal Frederick Vasseur was completely blindsided, stunned to the core. He wasn't just caught off guard, he was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of panic. Without hesitation, he summoned a high-level emergency summit, dragging in senior leadership, technical chiefs, PR operatives, and even key figures from Ferrari's executive board. The objective? To understand how everything unraveled so catastrophically, and why one of the most iconic names in motorsport history had just become the backdrop to what may be remembered as the most humiliating exit of the modern era. And make no mistake, this wasn't a driver quietly retiring or moving on. This was a legend defecting, and worse, defecting to the enemy. The very enemy Ferrari had sworn to destroy. Lewis Hamilton hadn't simply left. He had turned his back on the Red Empire, crossed the paddock divide, and aligned himself with Red Bull Racing, Ferrari's most bitter, most relentless rival. The internal collapse was swift and severe. Charles Leclerc, the team's homegrown prodigy and poster boy, went completely silent. No interviews. No public statements. No social media reactions. Nothing. Insiders say he left the factory looking visibly shaken, head lowered, avoiding even casual conversations with the staff he's known for years. Some say he feels betrayed. Others suggest he feels guilty, knowing perhaps that his rising status within the team may have inadvertently contributed to Hamilton's alienation. But the one thing no one questions is the depth of the shock. Because no matter what anyone expected, no one, not even Leclerc, imagined Lewis would walk away so publicly, so definitively, and so personally. Because that's what this was, personal. Deeply personal. According to individuals close to Hamilton, this wasn't just a career decision made in a corporate boardroom. This was a heart-fueled, pride-driven, legacy-obsessed act of defiance. At Ferrari, Hamilton had arrived with dreams of immortality, of joining the pantheon of red gods like Ascari, Lauda, and Schumacher. He envisioned lifting trophies in Monza, being cheered by the Tifosi as the man who brought glory back to Maranello. But what he found instead was something far colder. He felt disregarded, marginalized, treated like a guest in a house that never intended to make him part of the family. Meetings were missed, feedback ignored, strategies overridden. Media messaging increasingly focused on Leclerc, while Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, was often positioned as the wise veteran rather than the main contender. And it festered, quietly, until it exploded. Now, the explosion has left Ferrari in shambles. Team morale has cratered. The factory is gripped by confusion, self-doubt, and a gnawing sense of what could have been. Engineers are furious. Sponsors are rattled. And the fans? The fans are devastated. For many, Hamilton represented a once-in-a-generation opportunity, the final missing piece of the championship puzzle. And now that piece has not only disappeared, it has reappeared in the garage of their greatest rival, Red Bull. And just like that, the entire landscape of Formula One has been rewritten. 2026 is no longer just the beginning of a new regulation era. It is now the dawn of an unthinkable alliance. Hamilton in Red Bull attire. The king of the hybrid era now partners with a team that once denied him his 8th world title in Abu Dhabi. It's irony. It's revenge. It's redemption. It's drama that no screenwriter could have imagined. But with this seismic move come even bigger questions. What happens now between Hamilton and Max Verstappen? Can two dominant forces, each used to being the uncontested number one, truly coexist under one roof? Will Christian Horner manage to control the brewing power struggle before it erupts into a full-scale civil war inside the Red Bull garage? Or has he just created a ticking time bomb with a countdown set to Bahrain 2026? Behind closed doors, it's already tense. Some Red Bull insiders whisper that Verstappen was informed mere hours before the public announcement, a calculated move to prevent him from blowing up the deal before it was finalized. Others suggest Verstappen is furious, that he sees this as a betrayal of trust. That he never asked for a teammate, especially not this teammate. That he believes Red Bull should revolve around him and only him. And now, that illusion has been shattered. Christian Horner, always the politician, has attempted to spin the narrative, calling this the greatest driver lineup in the history of the sport. But even he knows, this is high risk, high reward. If it works, Red Bull could dominate the new era like never before. If it doesn't, the implosion could make the Rosberg-Hamilton civil war at Mercedes look like a friendly rivalry by comparison. As for Hamilton, he's not looking back. Those closest to him describe a man reinvigorated, emotionally charged, and laser-focused. He sees 2026 not just as a comeback, but as the final battle for legacy. He's not chasing points. He's chasing destiny. He wants to silence every critic, avenge every injustice, and prove once and for all that he is not just the greatest of his generation, but the greatest of all time. And make no mistake, the stakes could not be higher. If Hamilton dethrones Verstappen on his own turf, it will go down as the most legendary triumph in Formula One history. If he takes Red Bull to a title and leaves Ferrari in his rearview mirror, the symbolism alone would be worth more than any championship trophy. Because this isn't just sport anymore. This is theater. This is war. This is Shakespeare on asphalt. Ferrari gave him the keys to the kingdom, then treated him like a stranger. Red Bull handed him a sword and told him to fight. And now, Lewis Hamilton stands at the edge of history, not just driving a car, but rewriting the story of Formula One with every lap. He sought glory in red, but he will chase eternity in blue. And as the engines roar to life in 2026, the world will watch, breath held, heart pounding, because this isn't just a comeback. This is vengeance. This is legacy. This is Lewis Hamilton's final masterpiece.